You are on the record, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All right, I'd like to call this work session on AO 2020-79, creating an Office of Equity and Justice, to the record. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Yes. Felix Rivera.
Present.
Austin Quinn Davidson.
Here.
Mr. Constant. Miss Kennedy.
Here.
Miss Allard. I see she's on the phone. She may be muted. Mr. Perez Verdia. Miss Zolato.
Here.
Mr. Dunbar. I see Mr. Dunbar on the phone. He also may be muted. Mr. Peterson.
Present.
Mr. Weddleton.
Here.
Miss LaFrance. You have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So as normal, if members want to get in the queue, please put yourself in the chat or text me if you can't get into the chat. Okay, so for this work session, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Kimmel, who will have a presentation for us.
Felix, before Mara kicks everything off, this is Jason Bach instead. I just wanted to just take a moment to kind of just set the stage. One of the reasons why the administration has put forward this proposal is over the last couple of months, through the different town halls and meetings that the administration has had, and I know that some of this has also come through the number of town halls and meetings that the Assembly has had, but has been around the issue of equity, and that has really come to the forefront over the last couple of months as a result of COVID. So we've spent some time really looking at what other cities are doing, what some of the best practices are, and came to kind of the conclusion that a chief equity officer was both needed and appropriate for the municipality. So, as we go through this, just kind of keep that in mind, that this is one of those things that we've kept coming back to and people have kept raising to us as something that we should really explore. So with that, I'll kick it over to Mara to kind of run through the presentation that we've developed, and we'll be happy to answer questions as we go through it. So thank you.
Thanks, and before I turn it over to you, Mara, I just want to note Miss Allard is with us. Go ahead, Mara.
Great. Excuse me. Thank you. And I'm trying to get my PowerPoint to work. I'm not sure if it's showing up. I don't think that.
Yes, we see it.
Oh, terrific. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for having me. And I am here today. My name is Mara Kimmel, and I am here today to talk about this proposed Office of Equity and Justice and the creation of a Chief Equity Officer position. I've been working on these issues with the municipality in a volunteer capacity for the last 5 years, coming on 6 years, through the Welcoming Anchorage Initiative. And as Jason mentioned, these issues of equity and justice have really come to the fore and been brought into sharp focus through the COVID pandemic and some of the other the racial injustice issues that have been rising up through the country and in our city. But I wanted to just provide a little bit of background about how these issues and these needs and this effort has taken root even prior to COVID. Although, again, I think COVID has been exacerbating the impacts. And so I'll talk about that more specifically in just a few minutes. But this is a proposal to create an Office of Equity and Justice in a way that is designed to undo some of the structural racism and discrimination that members of our community feel and have been discussing, I think, more and more in recent days. And it's designed to address that structural racism and discrimination by structuring equity and justice into municipal government. And so the proposal is designed to build out an equity infrastructure in much the same way that we have a parks department, for example, that addresses parks and trails infrastructure in our city, or the Office of Economic and Community Development that is designed to build housing and business infrastructure, or our health department to ensure that public health needs are met through an existing infrastructure. And so our proposal here today is to create similar structures that respond to the community's need for justice and equity. So a little bit of background is in 2014, under Mayor Dan Sullivan, the municipality of Anchorage joined a national network called Welcoming America so that we could learn about best practices in ensuring that everybody who lives and works in Anchorage have opportunities for success for themselves and their families, and an opportunity to truly belong to the community in which they live. We've had an incredibly robust program over the last 5 years, run largely through volunteers, and we've had some major successes, which I'm going to highlight later, because I think it's important to consider the possibilities for the future. And we've, in fact, I think, begun to create structural responses to some of the inequities that have persisted in our community. So today's proposal is to create an office in order to ensure sustainability of these efforts and to embed this effort in city code to make sure, again, that this work continues. So that's why we need it. In terms of what the office would be trying to...
And actually, Mara, really quickly, before you continue, just a few things. So first, want to note for the record, we've been joined by Mr. Perez Verdia. Also want to note for the record, Mr. Dunbar put in the chat that he was present. And then last, after this presentation or this work session, Mara, if you could email us this PowerPoint, we're going to go ahead and put this on our website. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you.
And Felix, this is Jason Rofast. I did about 30 minutes ago email it to Jennifer.
Got it. Jennifer's on vacation, so if you can send that to Barbara, that'd be great.
Nope, will do.
Okay, terrific. So what is an Office of Equity and Justice, or what could it be potentially? And what the thinking is that it would be staffed through a chief equity officer who, as the proposal before you indicates, would be an executive branch hire that would be an assembly approved position, and the position would be a direct report to the mayor. And the primary purposes and work of the chief equity officer would be to align and enhance internal governance policies and practices around equity. And it would be to coordinate and cooperate with existing municipal agencies that are focused on different aspects of equity already, including the Office of the Ombudsman, the Anchorage Equal Rights Commission, the Office of Equal Opportunity, and then all of the municipal departments that I think address issues of equity in their normal course of business. In fact, the Office of the Ombudsman, the ERC, and OEO have been involved in formulating this proposal and have been intimately involved with figuring out the scope and potential relationship of the work. The other important piece that this office would add, or this chief equity officer would add, is to ensure training of municipal employees, identify equity opportunities and barriers to those opportunities for community members, and then recommend and promote equity policies in partnership with the other city agencies that I just mentioned. And then finally, this office would be able to continue the partnerships that we have created with community-based organizations over the last few years, and then also continue to engage the community members to make sure that voices are being heard in city government. So just dreaming about what the potential equity infrastructure in the city would look like, it would be a partnership between these equity-oriented agencies, including the Chief Equity Officer, the Office of the Ombudsman, the Office of Equal Opportunity, and the Office of Equal Rights Commission, the Anchorage Equal Rights Commission. And in the slide in front of you, there are bullet points that roughly describe the different ways in which all of these different organizations and agencies touch on issues of equity and have come together to form sort of an ad hoc equity cabinet over recent weeks to really flesh out this idea and these issues, and also to enhance their relationship with one another so that the work that everybody is doing is enhanced and leveraged through this internal partnership. Chief equity officers are not a new idea, but they're just starting to take hold and becoming a best practice in cities around the country in a variety of different states like Texas, Kentucky, and North Carolina. Cities in those states have been among some of the leading chief equity offices around the country, and they have come together and formed a network that is so that they're able to share best practices. And we anticipate that were the city of Anchorage, the municipality, able to create this position here, that person would be able to avail themselves of working with colleagues around the country. These officers are generally situated within executive branches of local governments, and the best practices in the research that we've done reveals that the most effective chief equity officers are those who do have a direct report to the mayor. The focus, again, of the work would be to make sure that people in our community have opportunity and access to services. And that's generally been the focus of the chief equity officers around the country. But going back to Jason's opening comments, I think what's really important to know is that since the COVID pandemic has taken hold around the country, most of these chief equity officers have now been refocusing their work to make sure that their cities are able to address the disparate impacts of COVID and ensure that equity is a consideration when thinking about how to emerge from the pandemic in ways that, again, protect community members. So I just want to go back before I finish and talk a little bit about what some of the impacts that the Welcoming Anchorage work has had to date through the partners that we've created and through the work of volunteers and also some of the mayor's office staff alongside the Ombudsman's office, AERC, and OEO. So with our local partners, specifically in this case with the Anchorage Community Land Trust, the municipality has been a partner to launch the Set Up Shop program. And for those of you who are not aware of the Set Up Shop program, it's an organization that's run out of the Anchorage Community Land Trust and serves low-income neighborhoods in our community. And they have begun a project where they're training new entrepreneurs. And so over the last 2 years of their existence, they've trained, or they will have trained by the end of this year, almost 100 new entrepreneurs in how to open their own business, how to figure out capital. They're pairing them with mentors throughout the community, and it's an incredibly successful program. And as you can also see from the slide, they're really reaching into women-owned businesses, businesses that are owned by Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. And most of the majority of the work that they've done have been with low-income residents. So the other work that we've done through Welcoming Anchorage around building up our economic muscle has been to really get a sense of who's in our community, what the skills and experiences that people have that they're bringing to our community that are underutilized, which is a concept known as brain waste, and trying to figure out how to combat that so that we can expand not only people's career opportunities, but also the city's overall consumer power, spending power, property tax base. It helps everybody when people are able to engage fully in our economy. We've also had some successes in improving public safety, and we've done that primarily through developing a pretty robust language access process. And I think there's a great story to be told that if you look at the way that the municipality responded to the earthquake in 2018, when we were running around and doing a very, very heavy lift to make sure that the materials that were produced as a result of the earthquake were translated and interpreted into the languages that people speak in our community. It was a struggle and it was a lot of work back then, but the work really paid off. And I think what we see now in the COVID pandemic is we are an example of how to do language access and make sure that emergency documents and emergency materials are translated as a matter of course into a variety of languages. And so we're no longer having to grapple with the fundamental question of why we need to interpret materials, but we're now looking at how best to do it. And what's really, I think, gratifying is that the nonprofit organizations, the community-based organizations in our city have been looking to the municipal government to answer and to help those organizations get through this very difficult time with regard to language access. So it's been an incredible success story and really demonstrates the power of investing in some level of equity infrastructure, in this case, language access. I think that the other impact that we've seen, as Jason referenced, is that we are, I think, more readily able to embed equity in some of the decisions that you will be facing as you look at allocating resources as a result of the CARES Act and in response to COVID. And you've already taken amazing steps in that direction with allocating and creating a pilot project that got money to small businesses and that money made a difference in the survivability of those businesses. And also allocating additional funds to make sure that we're going to continue to be able to help small businesses weather this. And then finally, I would just say that one of the biggest local impacts that we've seen from, and that we can continue to see with committing to creating this equity infrastructure, is that we have had successes in building community engagement. And what that means for us is that we're creating a talent pipeline for people to enter into municipal government. And one of the pieces of the Chief Equity Officer will be to work to make sure that boards and commissions within the city are diverse and represent the people who live here. We've also, though, now hosted 2 different civic engagement academies. And many of you have been present when those students have come to you at the end of their academies to share with you the experiences that they've had and their abilities to learn more about what it takes to run a city and their excitement about living in Anchorage and the opportunities that they feel that they can have to meaningfully contribute. I think that the more people that we get engaged in our city government, the better our public processes and the better our decision making. And I think that all of you, I've been watching all of you over the last week and watching you all just diligently listen to your community come out and want to engage and want to participate. And I think you all have been incredibly gracious and recognizing the value when residents of this community find their voice and are able to participate. And that's exactly the goal of creating this infrastructure, is that it provides opportunities for people to get engaged in their community, not only in their governance institutions, but it also continues to build opportunity out in our economic and civic life as well. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Were there any other presentations and discussions before we go in, or presentations or discussions from administration before we go to assembly member discussion?
No, Felix, there is not.
Got it. Okay, so then at this point, open up the queue if there's anyone that wants to ask any questions. Want to note for the record, we've been joined by Ms. LaFrance. Mr. Perez-Verdia.
Hi, can everyone hear me? I'm not sure if I'm muted or not.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Well, I apologize for missing the very beginning. It sounds like Jason spoke before Mara, so but I heard all of Mara's presentation. The 2 things that are on my mind, one is that, well, I guess 3. One is the conversation about creating a new office as opposed to building up what we currently have, and looking at kind of our existing structure and adding these responsibilities and really investing in our current structure. So the pros and cons of that, of the importance or value of creating something new as opposed to just making what we already have better so that we can address the issues that we're discussing. The second piece is really this long-term, difficult, messy work of addressing systemic racism within the city and within our city government and our policies and our practices. That is, unearthing, the built-in pieces that continue to allow us to or force us to function in the way that we are. And that's a piece I'm really interested in. As I've looked at a number of our practices and policies, it's built in. And so beginning to dismantle that and pull that apart and restructure that is gonna make a lot of people mad, and it's gonna disrupt a lot of long-standing understanding and practices. And so I think that's really important work, but I would want to make sure that this effort is really tackling that. And I have lots of examples that I could share about where I would want them to start. And then I think the third piece is just the sustainability of this, and how through different administrations, how can this be built in so that regardless of the priorities of a particular mayor or the priorities of assembly members, that this is something that is sustainable and that continues to work throughout different administrations. So those are the three pieces that I really wanted to address, and would love feedback from the presenters or other assembly members on those 3 points. Thanks.
To the chair, can I try to respond?
Go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you for those great questions. And I think, honestly, the second 2 questions that you asked answer the first. So you first posed the question of, is it possible to build on what we have? And then the second question, as I understood it, is how this person or how are we able to address institutional racism and the hairiness of all of that? And then the third is the sustainability of this. And the reason that I say I think the last 2 pieces answer the first question is because I feel like, in conversation with, again, the organizations that are directly addressing issues of equity and equality in our city, those organizations agree that we need this sense of collaboration. I'm going to go back to this third slide, where one of the discussion points is this notion that the chief equity officer will work with existing bodies within the municipality to identify opportunities for systemic change and work collaboratively to advance systemic reforms. We have a very, thin but strong municipal workforce, and what I mean by that is there are gaps. People work together in incredible ways, but it's just not a very none of the existing agencies that I've listed here have the ability to focus on building collaborations, identifying what equity means, and how to identify some of the systemic obstacles. So this position would work in concert with existing organizations, really leverage their efforts, be informed by their efforts, and seek to address issues of systemic racism right alongside our community members, because as you point out, this is a very sticky situation. And it takes a lot to finesse these kinds of conversations. So I think that focusing this and building this into the infrastructure of the city is vital if we are truly to engage in an effort to address these questions in any meaningful way. And in terms of sustainability, that's exactly the point of putting this into code, so that this position, again, and this effort assumes a quality of infrastructure and investment that municipal leadership is articulating that it is committed to making. That by putting this into municipal code, the municipal leaders are committing to ensuring everybody in our community has opportunity and access to the resources that they need to have successes for themselves and their families.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Chair, can I just follow up with one thing real quick?
Go ahead.
Thank you. That was good. I guess my last just comment that I wanted to share is that one of the things we just need to make sure that we're always considering is that we may not really be all having the same conversation, and that we may not even know what we're talking about. And in a recent meeting, someone said something to the degree of, we don't have systemic racism because I have not gotten any complaints. No one has come forward and complained, and it was strikingly apparent in that moment, not necessarily because of that person, but because I think often in these conversations we don't even know what we're saying, and that normally the response to equity issues is conversations around fairness. Are we equally distributing the resources, or are we responding to concerns, but not this sort of deep institutional policies and practices that continue to perpetuate the inequities that we see in our city. And so anyway, I would just continue to say that not to disparage any particular person, but it's really important that we continue to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of what we're even talking about here, and that we've been addressing these issues on a very surface level for a long time, and going deep is a whole new level of work. And I know people on the phone know that, but I just wanted to make sure that I pointed that out. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Zolato?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I have some concerns. Cameron, probably more eloquently than I, addressed some of them. I am a little bit worried about not making a larger investment in the 3 offices that we already have. Particularly the Office of the Ombudsman and the OEO are getting by on minimal support and can do a large part of this work we're putting forward. The C attached to this is $180,000. That's a significant amount of money that could be invested into existing infrastructure to scale to do this work. And one of the reasons I raise that is investing in those 2 offices in particular, to me, feels more like a balanced approach to addressing equity in the municipality from both branches of government, the Ombudsman and the OEO, working together. They have a proven track record, but again, we could put this money in, and I guess I'd like to hear a little bit more about how simply putting it in code means it's going to happen, because there's no requirement that I'm aware of that a future mayor has to make that particular executive appointment. So, if there is a future mayor that isn't interested in equity, that would be very sad, but possible. Or there are budget constraints, especially at this level of an executive position. I don't see how simply requiring a code makes that position be filled, I guess I should say.
So
This is,
I have
this
myself
is
in a
Jason.
queue.
I certainly understand, that concern, but all of the other positions, outside of the ombudsman, because they report directly to the assembly, but the OEO position is also an executive appointment. So I guess from our perspective, I think, as Mara has said, we are looking at ways to better coordinate all of the different things that we are working on, and as you look at some of the responsibilities of these different offices, it's different than what I think we're proposing with the chief equity officer. Their job and their view is going to be a broader policy-based role, where some of these other positions, the OEO, are more designed at making sure that the municipality is in compliance with federal employment and contracting laws. So there are some, I think, significant differences in what we're proposing this position would do and kind of the positions that we currently have. But that doesn't mean that all of them won't work together to form and create a more equitable based system, both within the municipality or within the MOA kind of government, but also municipality wide.
Mr. Chair, can I just do a little follow-up?
Sure.
Short. I know there's more people in the queue. I get that it's likely a mayor will appoint a chief equity officer if it exists. I was looking at that slide. I'd love if we could keep the screen share up. I've been referring to it as we've been having the conversation, but I think the difference here is that the OEO has to exist because we have to comply with certain federal laws. The idea of not having an ombudsman seems quite unfathomable to me, and the Equal Rights Commission is kind of ingrained in the process to pursue particular legal remedies. So I guess that's where I see a fundamental difference. I also am curious how we expect. I guess this is kind of to Cameron's point previously as well. If the chief equity officer exists within the mayor's office, to what extent is the independence and ability to police the mayor and police the municipal policies and practices and partnerships? Because, you're going to call out racism or inequity in your own actions. It's like the police policing the police in some ways. So I'm trying to get my head around this, because I want us to work on equity in a real and substantial way, but I want us to do it in a really meaningful way that can persist over time, and be as independent as possible.
To Assemblymember Zolato through the chair, can I respond?
Sure, but we have a lot of folks in the queue.
Sure. I just want to make two very quick points. One is that I completely agree that those other organizations are absolutely instrumental to promoting equity, and they are foundational. The work that I cited in terms of our successes over the last 5 years, however, have not been able to be coordinated through those offices, because those offices have very competing agendas and very different, very real tasks to address. And so if we are to meaningfully advance equity, we need to build the infrastructure. And then in terms of the sustainability and the ability to self-regulate and make sure that issues of equity can be taken up in critical ways by the mayor's office, those are issues that I think that we can address structurally in terms of looking at, do you want to have a term of appointment? All of those kinds of things, those I think are questions of governance and questions of good governance that there are answers to. But I would just urge you to consider that the list of successes that we have been able to accomplish, and the reason that people are proud of calling Anchorage a welcoming city, have been because of the work of what would be this position that does not currently exist in any formal way.
And I would just add on, just to make clear,
Briefly, Jason,
that this position and this individual would not be within the mayor's office. It would be a direct report to the mayor, very similar to what Bill Falsey, the municipal manager, or Chris Schutte in the Office of Economic and Community Development are. They're direct reports to the mayor, but they do not work in the mayor's office. So, I would just make that point, just so it's clear that this wouldn't be somebody that's in the mayor's office.
Thank you. All right, so I have 5 folks in the queue. I think that's probably going to take the rest of our meeting. So, Ms. Allard.
Thank you. So I agree with Ms. Zolato as far as we have $180,000, which ends up being more because of time and energy and other issues. But to disperse that among the other organizations that we already have in place makes a lot of sense to me. But what we've lost and what we've left off this slide, and I think it should be mentioned and it should be included, is that we do have the Human Rights Commission located right there in Anchorage. And I have seen a severe uptick in complaints and issues that are coming about that we are handling. And these are from state employees, these are from citizens of Anchorage municipality and statewide. And also on that we're looking at, as the Human Rights Commissioner, I'm going to put that hat on for a minute. We're also looking at taking, there's $3,000 coming from the federal government we're looking at implementing to help us bring in folks who work for nonprofits, that deal with nonprofits, that reside with the nonprofits, that we are able to bring them in, and they can now, we're looking at doing, file complaints with the Human Rights Commission. So to bring another avenue of discrimination, equal opportunity, to me is just a waste of funds when we have three major entities. And I see the Human Rights Commission being used a lot right now. And we're bringing on more staff over there, more investigators, more attorneys, and all these issues we're talking about here today can be addressed there. And we're doing an outreach program as well. So I really think this needs to be thought out more clearly, and that the funds that we're spending, it's just not a time to do that. If we truly are in an emergency situation, like we've been told by the administration, then why are we spending more money when we already have these things in place? Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so I am next in the queue, so I'm going to try to be brief and then have a couple questions. So ask that the responses be brief as well. So first I want to start with the ombudsman. So I have, through the budget process, talked with the ombudsman about, do they need any more help? And the response has always been no. So I'd just like to hear from the ombudsman, who I think is on the call, if you had any thoughts about what Ms. Zolato stated earlier, briefly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe that given the scope of the Ombudsman's office, we do have an unfilled part-time, half-time position that I've been holding off on filling till we see how the budget plays out with the current pandemic. But given our mission, I can't say I wouldn't appreciate more help or more money, but I think we can do the job that we are charged with doing with the current budget. We have a very narrow jurisdiction. We have jurisdiction over the municipality of Anchorage, the school district, and contractors of the municipality and the district providing services to the public. We don't have jurisdiction over nonprofits, businesses, or civil matters. So this kind of addresses some of the other concerns that have been expressed. Our jurisdiction, as is the Equal Rights Commission, is very limited. We primarily respond to constituent concerns.
Thanks, Mr. Hess. So then next to another point that Ms. Zolato raised, and it's a good one regarding administration to administration. I think we saw a recent example of this happening between the Begich administration, the Sullivan administration, and the Berkowitz administration, wherein the homelessness coordinator became an unfilled position in the Sullivan administration. So I think I'll address that in a comment in a second, which is I really want to echo Mr. Perez-Verdia's comment that it takes a lot of work and collaboration to go beyond surface level when it comes to addressing issues of equity and systemic racism. And, I think now more than ever, in the middle of a pandemic, should be when we invest in these types of issues. I also want to state, and with a question to the administration, from my mind and my perspective, equity and this idea of equity should not belong just to one branch of government. So would the administration be amenable to having this office be just like a couple other offices are, be between both branches of government?
This is Jason. Can you give me an example of, I guess I'm having a hard time figuring out a position that we currently have that is shared between both. I would just like to know more.
Yeah, happy. So I believe, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the Anchorage Equal Rights Commission is underneath both bodies. And thank you, Mr. Gates, as well as the municipal attorney. And I'm getting more internal audit. So it appears that there are some examples right there.
We'll have to think about that a little bit more. I will say that the municipal attorney does not report to the assembly. That is a position that serves at the pleasure of the mayor. I mean, I think we should have a longer conversation about that and how it would work.
Yeah,
I
that's
don't quite think that that's how the Equal Rights Commission works either, but we should continue to have that conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a good response. I'm happy to continue that conversation. Just wanted to put it out there. Okay, so that's it from me. Moving on, Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to kind of echo some of the concepts that both Ms. Allard and Ms. Zolato were talking about. And then I just kind of want to add just this idea that coming from from an average citizen's perspective, I think knowing that this office or this position would be a neutral one, I think is really important. I absolutely appreciate the idea of the independence of the Ombudsman's office or the Equal Rights Commission. And what I don't want to see is that that the position would become somehow politically tied. And I think one of the risks that we would always have for whatever mayor, whoever it is that is in that position, you would have it tied to some kind of political party, political agenda. It becomes political. And that's where the trust issue of the average citizen comes into play that I think we have to really take into account. So one of the other things I think that we could possibly do to try to maintain some neutrality in this and really raise the level of trust for residents would be to maybe look at a task force for this for a certain time being. I mean, this may not need to be a position that goes on and on into eternity, but it might be something that even a commission would be a little more useful. That way more people could even be involved in the whole concept. So I have a question then, I guess, and maybe that's, I don't know if that's to Dr. Kimmel or to Jason, but in regard to that potential for having a task force or for standing up a new commission, was there any consideration for that?
Was there consideration in doing what? I didn't quite catch the tail end of that.
Sorry, my question was whether or not there was any consideration put into standing up a task force or a new commission that would basically take on this challenge.
I don't think that we have considered a new commission to do this. I think what we have done is Mara worked through her presentation, is created kind of an ad hoc equity cabinet of each of these organizations to work on this. I think as she went through a presentation, all of these different organizations that we have talked about have been a part of this conversation in coming up with this position. So we can certainly continue to have this equity cabinet among all of these different organizations that kind of continue to talk about this. But ultimately, it's our view that this type of position is needed to do the type of work that we've been talking about for the last couple of months and years, more generally.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Mr. Gates.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two questions. The first one is the summary of economic effects shows the compensation for this position, 90,000 for the remainder of 2020 and 180 for next year. So where is this money coming from? Are other positions being cut? I mean, I understand we don't need an appropriation. It's probably already within personnel, labor. But do you need to cut some other positions or some vacant positions?
To the first question, for the remainder of this year, the proposal, because one of the main things that we would want them to focus on is a lot of the equity issues that have popped up and have been discussed both in the town halls that we have hosted, but also through the Economic Resiliency Task Force and the group and the individuals that have participated in that. We are proposing that the remaining amount for this year is funded through the CARES Act money that we have, and then going into next year and beyond, that is going to be decisions that we are going to have to work through as we develop our budgets year in and year out.
Okay. I didn't think of that CARES Act funding. All right. That's my second question was, I see that in the position description that's going to be codified, that the office is responsible for developing, supporting, and implementing the municipality's equity agenda. And so how's the equity agenda developed and approved? I guess that's just can be done through the mayor's office. How do you see that being developed? I guess the AM sort of sets out the initial equity agenda, but the next administration and future mayors, how do you see that agenda being developed?
This is Mara through the chair. The term agenda is a loose idea, but there was a process actually, and this goes to Assemblymember Kennedy's question as well. There was a process a few years ago that involved about 1,000 residents in Anchorage who came together to develop some strategic thinking about issues of equity and opportunity. And so the work that we've done since then that I itemized here is an outgrowth of that process. And so I would imagine that this position would continue to facilitate public engagement in making sure that the progress that has been made and the new emerging needs of the community to address issues of equity and opportunity would continue. So that's another piece of the position, is that they would be working with community members and partner organizations through the partnerships that we've fostered over the last 5 years to continue the work that has been done. And also to identify new, to identify new.
The Assembly's role in this process, working with the community to develop the agenda and so forth. I mean, currently there's executive powers. The Assembly passes resolutions from time to time saying we request the mayor to do this, urge the mayor to do that. Is that sort of the extent of the Assembly's role, asking for the agenda to be modified or to include this or that. Just a request.
I think agenda may have been the wrong word to use here because it's not, it's agenda is it's with a lowercase a. So I think an equity platform and equity, thinking about the scope of work. But I think that the questions raised by Assemblymember Rivera are really great things to think about in terms of where to structure this and what the relationship between the Assembly and the Mayor's office and also these other organizations could and should be. And I'm excited to that Assemblymember Rivera and Chief of Staff Bach will at least continue those conversations.
Yeah, I'm sure we have absolute confidence in the current administration and the goals here that are before us today. I wonder about 10 years from now, what the mayor at that time, if they will be doing the same. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, I have two folks left in the queue. Mr. Whittleton?
Thanks, and I think these are yes/no questions, and whoever wants to answer it. One is, thinking one of the jobs would be training municipal employees, and I just wondered, do the unions do training of their members? And then another question is, can the mayor just hire someone to do this job without even talking to us, just doing it? Thanks.
So the answers are maybe and yes. So there is actual, there are specific training platforms available to government employees that have emerged around the country. And there's a group called the Government Alliance for Racial Equity that has been doing training for municipal employees. And they, so that is one opportunity for importing their training methodologies here for municipal employees to understand about equity. So it would be for all employees, not just union employees, and it would be focused on what it means to be a government employee or how government employees specifically interact with these issues. The second question is, yes, in fact, the special assistants, first Amy Kaufman and more recently Shannon Kuhn on the 8th floor have been doing this kind of work up until now. And so they've really been taking on the equity issues and moving things forward, like, for example, the language access piece that I shared with you. So this is something that this mayor has committed to doing, and the Welcoming Anchorage program has been fairly robust on the 8th floor in terms of that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Zolato?
Thank you. Actually, John raised an interesting point about internal training. I've been kind of tracking that down lately in terms of how departments get trained and if there's some way we could uniformly place a training requirement into code for all departments, maybe with a difference between public-facing staff and non-public-facing staff. So I've been really thinking through that, but looking at utilizing the resources that we already have within the municipality. Circling back, though, to the initial funding through the CARES Act, I need to hear some conversation about the justification for that, because I had asked at the last work session on CARES Act, what departments aren't we thinking of that may have COVID-19 related implications? And I, of course, was thinking rec centers and other things, but if there are equity considerations around CARES Act, why aren't we looking at just scaling the existing infrastructure again? Because that's been really kind of a big piece of our CARES Act conversations, is to not create new things when we can scale and work through our existing infrastructure.
Through the chair, Assemblymember Zolato, I think there's certainly the conversation can be had about that latter piece in particular that you said. But again, I think the administration is just coming back to the place that we believe a policy-related position that kind of looks at all of these things that, as Daryl said earlier, some of these offices are limited in terms of their scope and what they do. This position would be broader, more policy-focused, and in our view is needed to really move the conversation and drive the conversation both within the municipality, but then also to the broader public. So, but certainly we can have the conversation about, how the CARES Act funds can be used for building up capacity in some of these other areas.
Thank you. Really quick, when is this up for before us? What's the date? I'm sorry. And is it up for public hearing?
It is a public hearing document, and I'm not sure if it's July 28th or August 11th. I will have to look.
Thanks.
Thanks. I'm fairly certain it's July 28th, but hopefully Barbara will be able to confirm and put that in the chat, or Dean. Mr. Perez Verdia.
Thank you. Question. I think this is probably for Jason, but what I hear you saying essentially is that the offices on the slide that we're looking at now, that the intent of this is outside of the scope of what those are currently focused on, and so and I'm looking at the Office of Equal Opportunity. The title of that and the role seem to be very different. It seems to be a compliance, as opposed to an office that works on equal opportunity. So I guess that my question is, what's the sort of pros and cons of expanding the role of an existing office, like for instance the Office of Equal Opportunity, and expanding that so that it not only addresses municipal compliance and federal employment and contracting laws, but also addresses policies, practices, and partnerships. So can you just share with me your thinking, your reasoning, why we wouldn't expand the role of an existing department as opposed to creating a new one? And I guess that's just the piece I need to be really clear on. And yeah, if you could just address that, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, and I might have to look into that a little bit more to give you a more full answer. So if you can give me some opportunity to get together with Heather and likely Bill Falsey to more clearly articulate what that office can and can't do in terms of some of the federal compliance and adding more stuff onto it.
Sure. And I would just add real quick that, I am in favor of putting resources towards the work that we're talking about. And I'm thinking about how it should be structured. And then the other piece, just to real quick address, I think it was Member Kennedy, there's just the reality of the political nature of this. And so I think it's just important for us to be thoughtful about that, and for us to address this in a way that that allows it to not be political, but to be practical and to be really about helping our city to become better and better. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. So to state it into the record, both Barbara and Dean did confirm that this is before us for a public hearing on July 28th. With that, we are out of time, and I'm going to end this work session. Thanks, everyone.